Clara D'Angelo's fingers had been trained since childhood to coax order out of cloth. Her mother taught her the rudiments on a battered treadle machine in their crowded tenement flat over Mulberry Street, where mending was the difference between presentable and shameful. By the spring of 1933, the crash's broken promises had reached every corridor of New York. Men stood in bread lines that snaked past shuttered shops. Women traded apples on street corners. Children grew bones as sharp as their opinions. Clara, 27 and newly widowed, survived by repairing garments for St. Bridget's Parish clothing drive. The church basement smelled of starch, wax candles, and damp newsprint. Donors left bundles of coats wool, tweed, corduroy, each in need of buttons or lining. Father Malloy paid Clara in soup tickets and just enough coins to keep her electricity alive, yet she welcomed the work. She needed the hum of a machine louder than the ache in her chest, louder than the memory of Anthony coughing himself out of this world when the dispensary had no penicillin left to offer. One rainy Tuesday, Clara noticed a tiny pocket sewn inside a child's pea coat, a secret compartment no bigger than a postage stamp. Years earlier, perhaps a mother had tucked pennies there for streetcar fare. Clara ran her thumb over the soft cube of cloth and felt an unexpected flutter of warmth. An idea slipped into her mind like a threaded needle. If fabric could hide coins, why not hide courage? That night, under the dim bulb of her rented attic room, she tested scraps of muslin, writing with indelible ink in her neat, slanted hand. "You are braver than the cold," she wrote on one strip. On another, "Storms pass, spring remembers." She stitched each message into the lining of a sample coat, burying hope where only the wearer might feel its whisper. Clara pressed the coat flat, smiled softly, and breathed as though discovering oxygen again. She did not know whether the experiment would matter, only that it mattered to her. Word traveled not by tongue, but by feeling. A week after that first coat left St. Bridget's, a gaunt boy of perhaps 10 burst through the parish doors. His mother, cheeks flushed from windburn, followed after him, clutching the coat he had received. She asked for Clara. The child pointed at a spot inside his sleeve. "It says I'm strong as an oak," he announced, eyes gleaming. "Ma says oaks don't fall easy." Clara accepted their thanks with modest nods, as though an oak herself, rooted, silent, steady. When they left, she returned to her bench and began preparing more muslin slips. If one line of ink could erect a backbone in a small boy, what could 100 do across the city? She composed each phrase like a psalm, short enough to memorize, sturdy enough to stand up to time. Your worth is not measured by coins. Hunger cannot swallow light. Even night trains arrive somewhere. She varied her handwriting so recipients would think a whole choir had spoken. She slipped each affirmation under hems, into collars, behind pockets. Sometimes she added a tiny embroidered star, bright mustard thread against navy wool, a constellation only a searching fingertip would find. The Great Depression had starved businesses of revenue, but it had not starved rumor. By December, stories drifted through soup lines about miracle coats that warmed more than skin. Some claimed the fabric itself generated heat. Others spoke in hushes of angels who hung laundry across rooftops at dawn. Clara, descending subway stairs one morning, overheard a flower vendor tell a customer, "Heard if you wear a St. Bridget coat, you walk taller." She ducked her head, cheeks flushing. Not every encounter was hopeful. One afternoon, she balanced on a stool, mending a tear in a herringbone overcoat, when Mr. Sauer, the parish treasurer, barged in, waving a ledger. "Ink and muslin purchases have doubled," he barked. "Explain." Clara's heart hammered. She had paid for the supplies herself, but she used the parish account when they ran short. She steadied her voice. "The extra muslin reinforces pocket seams. Donated cloth is fraying faster in this weather." The halfly scalded her tongue, but Mr. Sauer merely grunted and shuffled off, muttering about austerity. That night, she wrote "Truth sometimes hides to survive" and tucked it into a coat's cuff, asking silent forgiveness. Around the same time, a second storyline unfolded across the city. The Works Progress Administration opened a literacy center on the Lower East Side. The supervisor, a bespectacled teacher named Maeve Callahan, noticed an odd pattern. Several children learning to read already knew certain phrases by heart, phrases not in any primer. When she traced the origin to St. Bridget's coats, curiosity gnawed her sleep. She visited the parish under pretext of volunteering and caught sight of Clara at her machine, forehead glowing in lamplight, sewing something small and white into a lining. Maeve waited until Clara rose to stretch. "You're the scribe," she whispered. Words crashed between them, questions, doubts, confessions. In the end, Clara asked only, "Does it help?" Maeve answered with a nod that seemed to contain the entire city's gratitude. The two women formed a quiet partnership. Maeve supplied lines from poets and philosophers, Langston Hughes, Emily Dickinson, Marcus Aurelius, translated into language children could grasp. Together they adapted them. Hold fast to dreams became hold tight to dreams like mittens. The obstacle is the way turned into roadblocks make strong legs. In January 1934, a blizzard sealed doorways in white plaster. Coal delivery stalled, and parents wrapped newspapers around their ankles before trudging to relief offices. St. Bridget's basement became a lantern against the cold. Families queued for hours, hoping for a coat that fit. Clara's gloved hands moved as if detached from her body, patching elbows, sewing buttons, sliding affirmations into place. A wiry man named Jonah Rubinstein waited at the distribution table with two daughters clutching his sleeves. When Mrs. O'Leary, the volunteer, handed them coats, the older girl felt something scratchy inside her collar. She discovered, "You are loved beyond wages." Jonah read it aloud, a voice trembling. He folded the words between his palms like prayer. Weeks later, he returned with a loaf of rye bread he'd baked at the WPA bakery, insisting Clara accept it, though flour was rationed. Gifts arrived periodically, a small bunch of wilted violets, a hand-carved button hook, half a tin of cocoa. Clara hid them in a dresser drawer, a museum of gratitude that made her feel less invisible. With visibility came risk. In March, the Herald Tribune dispatched junior reporter Tommy Lowell to investigate rumors of coats that cure despair. He interviewed recipients, cataloged quotes, and photographed a lining scrap with Maeve's annotation of Hughes' verse. After days of knocking on doors, he cornered Father Malloy. "I'm told your seamstress is embedding messages," Tommy said, pen poised. Father Malloy's bushy eyebrows climbed. "Scripture reminds us, encourage one another and build each other up." Coats, words, what's the difference? Tommy's editor, however, smelled sensationalism. The newspaper planned a Sunday feature, Secret Society of Sewing Saints. They promised to name Clara. Word reached her by Thursday. Panic clamped her throat. She imagined donors drying up, Mr. Sauer screaming about waste, children teased for wearing charity riddles. That night, she couldn't thread a single needle. Her hands shook too violently. She walked from her attic down to the East River, ice chunks drifting like slow ships. Anthony had proposed to her beside this river, swearing someday he'd buy her a dress store. She crouched on the embankment, knuckles kissing stone, and addressed the dark water. "Tell me if I'm doing more harm than good," she begged the memory of her husband, of her mother of God. Only distant tugboat horns replied. But when she stood, she noticed a homeless veteran nearby, unfolding a tattered coat. Something white peeked from the lining. The vet rubbed the slip tenderly, then tucked it back and straightened his spine against the wind. Clara returned home resolved. At dawn, she visited the Herald Tribune office unannounced, hair pinned tight, calloused fingers smudged with carbon dust. She asked for Mr. Lowell, then marched past desks. "You may publish my name," she told him, "but you must publish why." She laid out testimony, the boy who walked taller, the father who baked bread, the veteran she'd seen that very night. She produced the torn ledger page, proving she'd repaid every muslin bolt. She even showed Tommy her drawer of humble gifts. Tommy listened, cheeks reddening. He asked to see the operation up close. Clara agreed on one condition, no photograph of her face. A name could function as a signpost, a picture she feared might turn her into a spectacle. Tommy accepted. His article appeared under the headline, "Stitches of Spirit." It described how small words fortified weary spirits, how bit players, seamstresses, teachers, donors formed a living patchwork across the city. He quoted Jonah, "The coat is warm, but the words lit the stove inside me." Clara's name appeared once, buried in paragraph 8. There was no photo, only an image of blue wool embroidered with a mustard thread star. Public reaction astonished everyone. Bundles of cloth, spools of thread, pads of stationery, and jars of ink flooded St. Bridget's basement. Children wrote their own affirmations, crayon missives like, "You got this," and mailed them in envelopes addressed to the Hope Lady. Even Mr. Sauer softened long enough to authorize more needles. With supplies secured, Clara trained volunteers. She taught a trembling steelworker's wife to hem, coached a retired milliner to align linings. When demand for coats exceeded donations, Clara and Maeve expanded into hats and scarves, hiding mini scrolls under brims and tassel knots. Father Malloy joked the parish basement was turning into a secret publishing house. Maeve called it the loom of morale. Yet challenges persisted. Summer of 34 baked the city and cases of polio surged. The clothing drive's relevance waned. Families needed fans and clean water more than coats. Clara worried their mission would stagnate, but Maeve proposed pivoting. They would sew light cotton jackets infused with messages about resilience against illness. Funding, however, ran dry. Tommy suggested applying for a YMPA art grant. After all, wasn't this a creative enterprise? At the hearing, gray-suited officials sat behind a mahogany table. They listened skeptically as Clara explained their work. One commissioner, lips pursed, asked, "How do you measure hope, Miss D'Angelo?" Clara reached into her valise, withdrew the worn slip that read, "You are loved beyond wages," and placed it on the table. "You measure it by whether a man keeps this in his pocket instead of giving up," she said. Silence followed. Then another commissioner, eyes moist, approved a modest stipend. The Sewing Saints, no longer secret, were officially part of the federal Project Number 1, classified under crafts. The program's recognition emboldened recipients to participate actively. A teenager named Lillian, after recovering from polio, designed tiny illustrated bordered sun rays, soaring birds around the affirmations. Her art brightened the interior of jackets that otherwise looked plain outside. A coal miner on furlough sent a batch of carved wooden toggles, each etched with the word forward. Suddenly, garments were collaborative canvases. One humid night in August, the basement bustled with volunteers hand-rolling cotton tape when the lights flickered out. Power cut to ration energy. Candles materialized. In their golden glow, Clara's voice rose in a suggestion. "Why don't we read some of the affirmations aloud?" People formed a circle. One by one, they recited. "Hunger is a visitor, not a landlord. Your dreams are bigger than the headlines. No winter lasts forever." Voices braided together, some hoarse, some lyrical. For a brief span, the basement felt like a cathedral without walls. Clara caught Maeve's eye across the candlelight. Both women understood they were midwives to something larger than clothing. As autumn returned, the economy showed faint pulse beats of recovery, though unemployment hovered cruelly high. Newspapers shifted focus to European unrest. Federal attention drifted. Donations dwindled again. Clara feared the circle would collapse. But the children, those original ambassadors of wonder, refused surrender. They proposed a citywide festival of pockets where anyone could share a hidden message sewn or written onto any garment they owned. Organizing logistics consumed weeks. The WPA provided a small stage in Tompkins Square Park. Local jazz musicians volunteered. On the crisp Saturday chosen, banners fluttered that read, "Hope fits all sizes." Hundreds arrived, wearing patched jackets, overalls, dresses. They queued at microphones to reveal pocket slips. A dock worker recited Shakespeare. A Harlem teenager quoted Zora Neale Hurston. A grandmother shared her own line, "Wrinkles are roadmaps of survival." Clara stayed behind the scenes, pinning last-minute messages onto children's sleeves. But when the crowd began chanting her name, Clara, Clara, Tommy gently took her arm, guiding her onto stage. She stepped up, heart rattling like a spool near its end. A hush settled across the park. "I am just a needle," she began, voice small but clear. "But a needle can carry thread through thick cloth. Each of you is both needle and thread. We have stitched ourselves together so tight that no depression can unravel us." Applause thundered, rolling across rooftops and pigeon wings. Camera flashed, reporters scribbled. Clara flushed, half proud, half frightened of notoriety, yet an unshakable calm anchored her. She felt Anthony beside her, smiling, and found within herself an affirmation no cloth could contain. Love outlives loss. Winter of 1935 arrived with softer edges. Breadlines shortened, factories sputtered back to life. St. Bridget's basement remained open, though the urgency had mellowed into habit. Volunteers still met on Thursdays, still tucked wisdom under seams, but now coats became heirlooms rather than lifelines. A woman who once received a child's pea coat returned to donate it, the stitched phrase, "Storms pass, spring remembers," intact despite laundering. She asked that it warm another child. Clara patched a new collar and smiled at the neat circle of time. Years later, when the Depression was a bruise fading in the nation's memory, former coat wearers carried their slips like talismans. Some taped them inside lunch pails, others framed them on parlor walls. A few, grown prosperous, funded scholarships for trade schools, naming them after the Hope Lady. Clara herself never opened a dress store, but she became supervisor of a WPA vocational program, teaching refugees from dust-blown farms to tailor garments for new lives. Her office cabinet held the original treadle machine, still operational, its iron pedal gleaming from countless footsteps. On Clara's 50th birthday, Maeve presented her with a gift, a coat of deep emerald wool, tailored to perfection. Inside the lining was a single patch of muslin, blank. Maeve handed Clara a fountain pen. "Your turn," she said. "Write something for yourself." Clara hesitated. All her life, she'd stitched solace outwardly. Now she inhaled a thought of Anthony's laugh, her mother's callous palms, the children in the basement, the circle of candlelight, the festival banners, the veterans' straightened shoulders. She leaned over the cloth and wrote, "Hope wears your name." She stitched the patch with deliberate care, knotting the thread firmly, sealing the words where only her heart could feel them. She slipped on the coat, buttoned it, and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. The city hummed, no longer starved, but still hungry for stories of its own endurance. Clara walked down Mulberry Street, head high, an invisible army of voices tucked inside her lining, whispering the oldest truth she had ever learned. Warmth can be sown, but it is belief that keeps a body alive.